Hello and welcome back. It is Monday. I am Mr. Sosatris, and this week I'm talking about Wicked. So with the movie version of the Broadway musical coming out this winter, I wanted to do a reread of all of Gregory Maguire's Wicked books and see how they've held up, how they work. It was a long time ago that I read the original 4 books in the series, and since then Maguire's written 3 more books in kind of a sequel trilogy to the original that does kind of circle back to the original series. And so I wanted to give it a go and just see what I thought of it. I'm a huge Wizard of Oz fan. I've seen the musical. I love the original books, and I really liked the Wicked books when I first read them, and revisiting them was kind of an interesting experience. So there's 7 books in the series total, and I'm gonna say if you want to do a reread before the musical comes out, you really only need to read the first book. The first book is definitely one of the best of the whole series. There were some others that I did enjoy, but if you just want to read the first book, you do get kind of the complete story. This follows the events of the original book, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, and ends kind of where that book ends. And as the basis for the musical, this kind of covers everything. There's a lot of world building and other things that become important later in the series. Characters like Mother Yackle, things like the Clock of the Time Dragon, all of those are kind of through lines that go through the whole series. And so you do kind of encounter more information about those later on. But if you just want to read the first book, this is kind of all you need to do. And it is sort of one of the best books. It's the most coherent and it's the most consistently engaging book in the series. So definitely read this one if you want. Now, if you've only seen the musical or heard the cast recording or anything, this book is very different from the musical. The overall really broad strokes are fairly similar, but the specifics are very different. In the musical, Elphaba, the Wicked Witch of the West, is sort of a magical prodigy, and she has magic, and it sort of inspires everyone else around her to kind of encourage her to shoot for big things, and then that'll, of course, all goes crazy. In this one, she really isn't a magical prodigy. There is something that we learn kind of later on in the series where, like, she is inclined towards being very good at magic, but in the context of this, you know, it really is, it's Glinda, or Galinda, she's known in the first part, who is kind of more traditionally gifted, if we'll say that. You know, when they go to Shiz University, Glinda's the one who is sort of, you know, the one that everyone assumes is gonna do good things, and she's the one who kind of goes into politics and everything. But the story of this one in the book itself is very much about sort of how we perceive others and how they perceive themselves. And so the moniker of witch is sort of, it's given to Elphaba by other characters, and then at one point later on, when bad things have happened and she's sort of feeling at a very low point in her life, she sort of takes the term for herself as a way to kind of keep others away. It's sort of armor, you know, she calls herself anti-witch, and it's meant to kind of keep other people away because she feels very guilty about something that happened, and she feels like she has to atone for it. And so the concept of her being like a wicked witch sort of happens after the fact. She isn't really considered a witch until the later books, when their characters are looking back at, you know, the events of her life. But in the course of her existence, she never really sees herself as a witch. She calls herself that, and very near the end, you know, she says, fine, if you want to call me that, you know, whatever, you can call me that. But she never really fully embraces being a witch in the course of her own life. It's sort of after the fact, when we explore her legacy and the way that society creates characters out of real people, that she kind of attains this reputation and legacy of being this like fearsome witch who stood up to the Wizard of Oz. But this is such a good book. Now there are quite a few time jumps. It spans quite a long time. There's, you know, her as a young child, there's her in school, there's her years after she's left school and is kind of operating as like a freedom fighter, almost like a terrorist. She's working in the shadows, undermining the wizard's regime, which is very cruel. In the book, the wizard is quite a lot more of a villain than in the musical. In the musical, he's more of a idealistic, and he's sort of without scruples, and so he's able to sort of work to, you know, maintain power, but he's not quite as evil as he is in the book. And there's also a period sort of later on where she is sort of living in seclusion, and then we get kind of the events of The Wizard of Oz, the original book, where you've got Dorothy and all that stuff. But it's very engaging. What I love about this is that the plot is very, very messy. It's a lot of different bits and pieces thrown together, and it kind of moves at the speed of real life. And so it's very much not this heroic, you know, character arc. It's more just, you've got this very angry, hurt character who is always considered an outsider and who kind of just does what she can to stay alive and do the right thing as she sees it. And then after this, you've got everyone else who's left over reconstructing the events of what happened into kind of a more coherent narrative. And that's where you get the idea of the Wicked Witch of the West and all that stuff. So this is a really, really interesting book to read along with The Wizard of Oz. If you read this, you come to realize that the events of the Wonderful Wizard of Oz are sort of like the propaganda version of the story that's given to the public by certain characters to sort of vilify the events and to strengthen the wizard's regime. And then, of course, you know, he leaves at the end of this book, and then we've got other stuff, other political craziness going on after the fact. So if you just want to read this one, definitely do it, but don't expect kind of the Disney-fied musical with really clear, you know, character arcs that you see in the musical. This is very much a portrait of political maneuvering and a internal journey of sort of someone creating their own identity out of nothing. And so it's a little slower, it's a lot more adult. There is kind of this sarcastic humor that kind of continues without, and there is kind of this old-timey whimsy that you see here and there. But amid all of that, it is a very adult story with very adult things happening. And so it's a much more of a political thriller at points. It's much more of like a human drama at others. But it's very much an adult novel, not something that fans of the musical who have only enjoyed the musical might get into. Like, you have to kind of be aware that this is a very different beast. It has the same kind of overall feel as the musical, but the story that it's telling is a much more complicated, darker story. Plus, I just love the artwork. Here, we're going to open this up. All of these books have these great step back covers. And they're so pretty. So anyways, that's Wicked. That's the first book in the series. Next up, you get the sequel, Son of a Witch, and this one follows Lear, and it's sort of, there's a question of whether or not he is the son of Elphaba, but it's kind of obvious, you know, from the get-go, and of course the title of the book. And I'll show this one also has another step-back cover with all kinds of symbolic meaning that you have in the story. I genuinely really like this one. Now, people didn't quite enjoy this one as much. This is a very different kind of feel from the first book because it's told from Lear's perspective. It's very much about addressing the legacy of who his mother is and setting up kind of the political instability in the Emerald City that happens after the wizard leaves. This is sort of in between the first and second of the original Oz books. The second book, The Marvelous Land of Oz, ties into the fourth book in the series. And so this is sort of the in-between years of instability and everything that's going on. But I don't know, I still really like this. You get this kind of character. He really doesn't know what his deal is. This book really reminds me of A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man by James Joyce, where you've got this character who he tries on different identities. He tries to be a soldier, he tries to be kind of, you know, a religious recluse, and none of these sort of fit, and it isn't until he sort of embraces his own identity and kind of figures out who he is that he starts to kind of have momentum in his life. And so the first part of the book very much has sort of slower pacing. There is kind of a long flashback scene where we get sort of continuity from right at the end of Wicked up until the events of this one, and then we follow him from then on through his life. It's a little meandering, it's a little messy, but the character arc is genuinely really good, and I really like Lear's story in this one. Again, we get lots of political stuff going on in the background, but it's very much a story about finding your own identity, especially when there's this rumor that you're the son of kind of this notorious figure who has become sort of an iconic, evil, anti-establishment symbol, and how that affects kind of how you see yourself. So I did really like this one. Now, the next book in the series is not my favorite. This one is A Lion Among Men. This one follows... I'll show you the cover there. It's so pretty. This one follows Burr, the cowardly lion, and this book is sort of meandering and all over the place until you get right to the end, because this book is really important for sort of the lore that's been building up throughout all of this. There's a lot of mysteries surrounding certain characters that have been operating in the background. There's one character in particular, Mother Yakel, who has like a cameo in Wicked and then shows up in Son of a Witch, and she's just kind of a mysterious figure. She seems somehow magical, but you're not really sure what her deal is or why she's there or what her purpose is. And this book gets into sort of who she is and what's going on. There's also this very long ongoing story about the Grimoire, which is sort of the book of magic that Elphaba comes into possession with in the first book, and it's sort of lost in the second book. And so there's this mystery of what this book is, where it came from, what its purpose is, and we get some information about it in this one. A lot of this book is just sort of wandering through the woods. There's sort of a quest narrative, sort of. Burr eventually meets up with other characters and they sort of form a little troupe, and so a lot of it is them kind of traveling throughout Oz. And so most of this book is just ambiance and giving a feel for what Oz is like during this unstable time, and it didn't really work for me, but it is very important to the bigger story if you're kind of concerned about sort of the lore underpinning this whole thing. And so, you know, it is important, but thankfully it's not a super long one, so you can kind of breeze through it, but this one wasn't really my favorite. And then the fourth book in the series is Out of Oz, and this one, it's so pretty. The artwork in these books is just gorgeous. No, stop, there we go. And this one is, I kind of have mixed feelings about this. The first time I read it, I remember really liking it. But the second time I read it, it had some of the same problems as A Lion Among Men. The first, like, 2/3 of it are very meandering and slow. It does introduce another character, Rain, who, you know, may or may not be the son of Lear, so she may or may not be the granddaughter of the Wicked Witch of the West. The front cover totally spoils it because it's like, here she is and she's green, so obviously. But the story that it's telling feels a little uncertain until we get to the point where it matches up with the events of the second Oz book. The Marvelous Land of Oz is the second book, and because that's when Dorothy comes back. And so once Dorothy's back in the picture, the book is great and the pacing is good. We get lots of really interesting lore. Rain's story is great. We get to see her she's a young child in this one, so we see her sort of growing up and, you know, It's sort of a coming of age tale amid all this other stuff that's happening. There's some really great characters, and it is ultimately very satisfying, and there's a big reveal at the end that is pretty great. And this also connects with, we see kind of what's going on with the Clock of the Time Dragon, what its purpose is, all of that stuff. So it very much links in with the heavy lore of what's been going on, but I feel like it is a little indulgent at the beginning. There is some great stuff, because the first section is sort of, it follows Glinda as kind of a has-been politician who's under house arrest in her house during this coup that's happening. And while I do like her character and seeing how she relates to other characters and everything, it takes too long, and it takes a long time before we kind of get a sense that this is actually Rain's story, because she's kind of a background character for the first little bit of it, and then you realize this is her story, and we see her moving on. She connects up with some characters from before, and we follow them, and then it's kind of this, again, questing, rambling through the land, like the countryside. And then finally, when it connects back to Dorothy's story, when she comes back, that's when the story really picks up. And there's some really, really great stuff that happens. And it is a very satisfying conclusion to that part of the story. So overall, it is satisfying because the main mysteries at the heart of this whole thing are compelling enough that you do kind of want to keep reading, even when the story does feel a little uneven pace-wise here and there. So take that with a grain of salt. Now, after Out of Oz, there's a trilogy that's called Another Day, and they are the Brides of Maracoor, the Oracle of Maracoor, and the Witch of Maracoor. So it's a trilogy, and it follows Rain again. At the end of Out of Oz, it sort of ends on a bit of a cliffhanger, because she goes off to do something, and we don't know where she's going or what her plan is. And so these books follow her, and it takes her into kind of another land that's not another universe as like Earth is to Oz, but just another land that's outside of Oz. It's across the desert, across the ocean, and so no one in Oz has any concept of who these other people are, and it feels like it's like a whole different kind of culture and universe. The culture is very ancient Greek sort of inspired, which was very cool. And I really liked the first book in that series, because she lands on this island that's populated by these sort of secluded women who are in this sort of cult, who do what they do because they feel like it's their duty to protect the balance of everything, and she sort of has to integrate with this small community of sort of isolated women, and so I really liked that, because it felt like it was a totally new experience. The whole Another Day trilogy feels like Rain's story is sort of paralleling Dorothy's story in the original book. So you get some really interesting parallels, but so in this case, it'd be sort of Dorothy arriving in Munchkinland. But the story is very much about sort of just the interpersonal kind of drama among these women on this island. It's a very small setting, but it's very interesting. And there's a second plot line that follows sort of the minor government official whose job it is to check on the women on the island and make sure that they're okay. And there's something kind of going on in the world as a whole. Things seem to be a little bit more magical than they were. There's sort of strange things happening. And so while his story isn't necessarily the most exciting, I didn't like it as much as Rain's story, you do get a sense of something bigger happening in the world that does make for a very compelling kind of cliffhanger at the end. And I don't want to give away too much spoilers, because a lot of this sort of is predicated on spoilers, but the second book involves Rain and a group of people sort of traveling to find the Oracle of Maracoor, which does sort of parallel Dorothy searching for the Wizard of Oz. And there's some adventures that they have along the way, but it isn't really action adventure the way you'd expect. It's very much a quieter, more contemplative, literary sort of voyage or journey. It's overland, not overseas, so it's a journey. And so it is a little bit slower, and it does remind me of the slower parts in A Lion Among Men and Out of Oz. But in this one, it feels a little more focused because it doesn't go on over long. These books are much shorter than the others, and so the pacing feels a little better. And I did really like the reveal of who the Oracle is and how that person connects with Rain's story. And then the third book in that series is The Witch of Maracoor. And this one involves Rain making peace with everything that's hurt her in her life, because she's very much a closed off person. She's lost a lot. She's very angry. And so the final book in the series is very much her retracing her steps and making peace with everything. She does end up returning back to Oz. And so we get a lot of conversations between her and the people in her life, where she's able to sort of come to a better understanding. And so by the end of the book, she's very much a whole, complete, kind of emotionally healthy person. And I did genuinely like kind of where it's going. Now, there is something that happens in the third book that made me really angry, because it's something you see a lot in literary fiction. And this is kind of a bit of a spoiler, so I'll put a spoiler warning here, but it won't ruin the whole story. So spoiler warning, I'm going to discuss a plot point. So there is a character in the Another Day trilogy who's sort of a middle-aged guy. He's got a wife and kids. His job is okay, but he's sort of feeling a little listless and unfulfilled. And he crosses paths with Rain, and she at that point is like barely an adult. She's like 18 or 19. And he's like in his 40s. And there's a moment that comes out of absolutely nowhere where he sleeps with her, and it sort of rekindles his interest in life and makes him value his family, and he goes back to his wife and kids and blah blah blah. And I hate that so much. It's such a dumb plot point. You see it so much in literary fiction, where you've got, it's a teacher, or, I don't know, a corporate person who's just feeling lost with their life and disconnected from reality, and it takes them sleeping with someone who's a lot younger than them to kind of rekindle their love of life. And I hate that so much. It's like, if the characters are like two consenting adults, fine. I don't care about that. But it's this concept that like grown adult middle-aged men have to find a young person who is willing to go along with this just for them to kind of feel something, because it's important for them to reconnect with something. I don't know. I can't stand that, especially since there's usually no like relationship beforehand. It's not that they meet and they fall in love or anything. It's just like a thing that has to happen for them to connect with their life. And I just hate that so much. It's so annoying. And so this does happen in the final book, and it made me mad, but just letting you know about that. So no spoilers from here on out, moving forward. The Another Day series overall, I think, is an interesting one, but it could have been condensed a bit. I think it could have been easily 2 books. The overall story that's being told is interesting, but I don't know how necessary it felt, because it is a good parallel to Elphaba's story, because you've got Elphaba, who her life ends in sort of misery and tragedy and regret and loss, and then you've got Rain's story, where she ends her story kind of making peace with herself and becoming someone that she wants to be. And so I can understand the need for that story. Rain is a way to kind of symbolically redeem Elphaba, and find peace with her life, which is fine. But there's a lot of extra stuff that just feels like it's sort of treading water. Gregory Maguire loves turns of phrases and witty language, sometimes too much, and so he'll have characters who will just make like charming bon mots just like out of nowhere, just because, and it feels a little forced. I still like Gregory Maguire's writing. I really like his other works as well. I really liked Confessions of an Ugly Stepsister. I really liked Mirror Mirror and Lost. That's the other one that I've read. And so he's a good writer, and I like the way he describes things. He has a very artistic style, but I think it's just manage your expectations when you get into this, because this is not an action adventure type story. The musical is a lot more about the flash and dash and spectacle of big, huge things happening. And I'm so excited for the movie that's coming out, because it sounds like they're really going to do the musical well. But the books are telling a very different story. It's very much a personal story about people and how our legacies are interpreted by others and the effect that our actions have on our descendants and the people around us. And so the way that you can hurt people without realizing it, and the friendships that you can make that you don't realize are important until after they're gone. So overall, I did enjoy this read through of the series. I read, straight through. I didn't feel the need to kind of read other books in between. But with that said, I still think the only book that really grabbed me were the first two Wicked books and the first Another Day book. The other books felt like they were written because the publisher was pestering Gregory Maguire and saying, these books are really popular, you need to keep writing them because people love them. And so he did his best and, wrote a really interesting, engaging story. The stories are great, but you could tell that it wasn't a book that was written because he desperately wanted to write them. It was a book that he wrote because he felt like he had to. And that's, incidentally enough, that's something you see in the original Oz books. L. Frank Baum wrote, I think, 14 original books, and he really only wanted to write the books for a little bit. He wasn't really that committed, and you can really tell because as the series goes on, he kept trying to not write anymore. He wasn't interested in them. He's like, I'm done with this. I don't want to do it anymore. But of course, there was such a huge demand for these books. They were so popular that he kind of had to keep churning them out. And so I think that's kind of what happened with Maguire. Now, that's just my guess. There is elements in the Another Day series that really felt like this is something that he wanted to do, and it felt really engaging and new and different. But, overall, the third and fourth Oz books, or the third and fourth Wicked books, do feel like they were just kind of there for the sake of it, because they really could have been one book. It could have easily been a trilogy, and it could have addressed all of the big lore issues that were kind of running throughout the whole series, but that's okay. We got what we got. There's good stuff there. There's a cat here now. Hello, baby. And if you want to read them, I say give it a go. I could see these working really well in audiobook because there's lots of really unique voices. So if you can read the audiobooks, definitely do that. I read them in physical books, and then I read the Another Day series as ebooks because I found them, they were all on sale. And so I was like, I got them for really cheap, which is good. So, the Wicked series is very much an acquired taste. If you like that kind of thing, then I think you'll like it. If you like Gregory Maguire, then you'll definitely like these. His author voice is very distinct, and his style is very clear. But if you're expecting goofy, fun hijinks like the musical, you're probably going to be disappointed because it's very different from the musical in feel, but the soul is very much kind of the same. But I think the musical does a better job at telling a more unified story where it has Elphaba and Glinda and their meaningful friendship, which isn't really in the books, but that duology is really compelling, and I think it works really well for the musical. But in the book, it's very much about Elphaba and her relationship with kind of everyone, and the people she pushes away, the people she uses, and the people she has regrets about going forward. So it's very much something that some people are going to absolutely love, and other people are just not going to love at all. So with that said, I will let you go. I will see you next week, and in the meantime, happy reading. Bye.